Hi, my name is TJ Ball, and I'm a sophomore studying government here at Cornell University. Today, me and several of my peers will be looking at the current situation in the Arctic and the oil industry there. So, the primary objective of our project will be to defend the current policy, which bans oil drilling for the next several years and prevents new oil leases from being given to oil companies. The reason we want to do this is because we believe that the current environmental and economic situation in the Arctic makes it such that it's really just like not practical for oil companies to move forward with establishing new oil rigs, new drilling facilities, and we think that there's a lot more profit and revenue for the state of Alaska that could come from other industries like tourism and fishing. So what happened at the end of 2016 was President Obama signed an executive order which reinforced a current U.S. law which basically defends areas in the Chukchi and Beaufort Seas from being subject to oil drilling. And he performed this action kind of to protect his environmental legacy, but this action has major implications for the Arctic community and Arctic economy. So we've done some analysis and we've determined that the cost of drilling in the Arctic is extremely expensive and uncertain because right now there are ice sheets which are preventing access to oil reserves, and we think that it would be better to focus efforts on the tourism industry and on fishing, as well as sustainable energy, which could yield pretty equitable returns over the next several years, next several decades. So there are a lot of interests at play. Some of the major interests include major energy corporations like Shell and BP. Shell has already put $7 billion into trying to get Arctic drilling set up in the Chukchi and Beaufort Seas, and they have decided to reverse their course of action because they've realized that it's just too expensive and not practical. Environmental activists for years have been trying to get a ban on drilling in the Arctic to make sure that that ecosystem, that environment stays protected from potential oil spills and the disturbance of the environment from new oil rigs being put in. Local Alaskans are concerned not only with job growth in their local economy, they're also extremely concerned with making sure that their coastlines are going to be protected. Specific Alaskan industries like fishing and tourism, including the cruise line industry within tourism, really care about making sure that the environment is healthy because a healthy environment is necessary for those industries to succeed moving forward. Finally, we have politicians on both sides of the aisle who are dealing with environmental and energy company lobbyists who have very contrasting opinions on what to do in the Arctic. The current situation, in terms of the environment, there's not as much of a threat of destabilization of ecosystems when drilling is banned. For the economy, there isn't necessarily going to be an immediate return from new oil revenues. However, there's a lot of potential for long-term sustainable growth from green energy and from the growth of of other sectors within Alaska's economy. And then in terms of political opportunities of the current situation, native culture will be preserved because there won't be industrialization of tribal areas, and also environmental activists and local fishermen won't have to worry about instability within their local sea community.
Our environmental considerations for the following policy will overview climate change, melting sea ice, the implications of such, and destabilization of ecosystems. As you can see on the graph to the right, there have been increasing temperature anomalies over the past century. The atmosphere and the oceans have warmed over the past 100 years, and the amount of snow and ice have been decreasing. The sea levels are rising as the concentration of greenhouse gases are increasing. The current trend in sea ice melt has been a negative trend, decreasing at some points 44% below of the cumulative averages for such months. All months have shown a negative trend in the sea ice extent over the past several decades. As you can see in the following image, there is a large overlap between the reserves in yellow and the sea ice in white, especially near Alaska. The result of this overlap leads to inefficient oil rig access, which will cost taxpayers tremendous amounts of money in subsidies. The oil rigs will be more precarious due to weather concerns, and extraction, transport, navigation will be more and more expensive the more ice is there. Our recommendation is to wait for the sea ice to recede before any drilling is allowed. The ecosystems within the area are also shifting and changing. There are increased dead zones due to primary production. There are more organisms migrating due to oxygen diffusion from central latitudes. These destabilized ecosystems are especially vulnerable. They're at a tipping point, so any sort of oil spill or catastrophe would destabilize these ecosystems to the point of no return, which would have a tremendously negative effect on the local communities.
Allowing Arctic drilling and going against the current government policy has a number of major implications for the state of Alaska. By allowing Arctic drilling, a number of new jobs would be created, as infrastructure must be built for new drilling sites. Jobs would also spring up for logistics coordination, as new trade routes are established to transport oil from the Chukchi and Beaufort Seas. In addition, allowing Arctic drilling would create a vast amount of wealth and profits for these major oil companies, as well as surrounding Alaskan communities. Finally, it would also make it more economically feasible to continue using the transatlantic pipeline, which has currently seen its volume of oil greatly reduced as the Prudhoe Bay is producing less and less oil. However, by allowing Arctic drilling, it's not sustainable in the long term, and there will be a major drop-off in profits for energy companies and the local community once fossil fuels become scarce and sustainable energy has to be transitioned to. Additionally, allowing Arctic drilling has immense potential environmental damage costs, and these costs would hurt oil companies and the local community, as well as the U.S. government. Finally, allowing Arctic drilling will be even more expensive because new infrastructure for drilling will have to be able to stand up to changing weather patterns and more intense storms. By sticking with the current policy and not allowing Arctic drilling, other Alaskan industries have room to blossom. Tourism and cruise lines have the opportunity to bring in a number of new jobs and revenues to the state of Alaska. In addition, improved environmental health from a lower risk of oil spills and from the introduction of new rigs will make the Alaska environment and ecosystem more stable, providing new opportunities for fisheries and ensuring that people working in that industry have job security for years to come. By not allowing Arctic drilling, there's also a greater opportunity for sustainable investments into other forms of energy, such as wind or solar energy. The profits from these industries are relatively unexploited within the state of Alaska, and in fact could outweigh the profits from oil drilling a number of years down the road. Finally, these industries are a lot more looking towards the long term, and will guarantee that Alaska has economic success not only now, but also in the future. Finally, by not allowing Arctic drilling, there's no risk of environmental costs from oil spills. Preventing Arctic drilling has some negative downsides as well. It means major oil companies, or major energy companies in general, will have to miss out on short-term fossil fuel-based profits within the region. Having to keep drilling away from the Arctic for 5 to 10 years, or having to transition to green energy, means less immediate economic returns, though this will be made up for by the fact that sustainable energy could bring long-term profits for these major energy corporations and the local Alaskan community. These two graphs demonstrate the significance of the tourism industry to the Alaskan economy. In the graph on the left, you'll see that over the past several years, total tourist expenditures, or rather how much tourists to Alaska have spent within the local economy, has increased consistently. What this means is that the tourism industry within Alaska as a whole is growing and is becoming more and more important to the Alaskan citizens' welfare and the overall economic well-being of the state. Because of this, it's all the more important that the local ecosystem and environment, which often draws in tourists, continues to be clean and attract new visitors. The graph on the right demonstrates the positive trend in total labor income impacts over the past several years. This is essentially demonstrating how greatly the growth in tourism has been impacting local Alaskan citizens and how much they take away from their job wages. As the tourism sector becomes more important for supporting household income, you can see why it's also in the interest of local Alaskans to ensure that the local environment is healthy and clean to bring in new tourists and continue to grow that industry.
The vast majority of energy production in the Alaskan Arctic comes from the crude oil industry. To reiterate what's been stated, this has proven to be rather disastrous from both an economic and environmental standpoint. Resources would much more optimally be allocated in renewable energy industries, particularly wind energy. In early 2010, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory released a report showing that Alaska has the potential to install nearly 500,000 megawatts of wind power. This amount of energy would satisfy all electrical needs within the state based on current consumption patterns. In fact, with current extracting technologies, according to the U.S. Department of Energy, wind could potentially supply over 15 times global energy demand. And with the price of these technologies rapidly dropping, wind is looking to be more and more of a viable alternative. Additionally, renewable energy industries generally create more jobs than big oil. These jobs are also typically higher in pay, higher in growth potential, and offer more diversity and professional opportunities. Finally, there is a significantly smaller risk associated with wind power. The National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration reports hundreds of oil spills in a given year. These disasters, such as Deepwater Horizon, may cost upwards of billions of dollars. Wind, overall, is a much more sustainable option.
What you see mapped out here are two different reactions to the realization that current environmental conditions make the prospect of drilling in the Arctic extremely uncertain for the next 5 to 10 years. On the top line, you see the traditional approach that most oil companies and energy companies prefer to take. During the 5 to 10 year wait until drilling in the Arctic makes economical sense, most oil companies will invest elsewhere in the world and try to build up the oil and fossil fuel industry in other regions of the world. Then, once drilling in the Arctic makes economic sense, they'll return and set up new oil infrastructure and drilling apparatuses. However, another 10 to 20 years down the road from that, they'll have to transition over to sustainable energy, or at least start transitioning over, because of the scarcity of fossil fuels and the realization that in the long term, a more sustainable form of energy is necessary. Transitioning over to sustainable energy will be extremely costly for these major energy corporations. So, it makes more sense for them to follow the second timeline on the second line, in which the transition to sustainable energy is performed now, the environment is made a safer place, there's more profit opportunities in the long term, and other industries like tourism and fishing are allowed to bolster profits. In the interests of guaranteeing that there are new funds for the Alaska Permanent Fund and ensuring long-term economic growth for the state of Alaska and its community, as well as major energy corporations, we strongly advise that action be taken to follow the second path. Though the orthodox approach outlined on the top line may be easier to follow, it's not what's in the best interest of all of these different actors. Taking into account the fact that the new administration cares very little about environmental concerns, we've decided to focus on the economic aspects of the current situation in Alaska, and we believe that because of the economic interests of local Alaskans, major energy corporations, and the economy as a whole, it makes more sense to pursue a path that avoids further drilling in the Arctic and pursues other industries such as green energy instead. Pursuing further drilling in the Arctic at this time comes with extreme uncertainty and risk for the local ecosystem and environment, as well as the energy companies and taxpayers who are spending so much on these new oil prospects. We believe that the policy we have laid out takes into consideration all of these separate interests and, in fact, focuses on economic concerns in a way that makes logical sense to the current administration